Welcome to the Dialogue Internet Radio Network and the Latinos Matter podcast with Emily Juaregui and Hector Montes. Latinos Matter is a news aggregator and commentary site from some really cool Latino political wonks. And now here are Emily Juaregui and Hector Montes.
Welcome to the Latinos Matter podcast. I'm your co-host, Hector Montes, and with me, as always, is my colleague and co-founder of Latinos Matter on Twitter, Emily Juaregui, who's joining us from Dallas.
Hey, Montes, how are you?
I'm doing well. I should say that I am joining the podcast from El Paso, Texas, El Paso, Texas. And so we may be in different cities, but we've always done this show together, whether we're in the same city or not. And we're happy to be back after an extended leave. Our professional and other responsibilities sometimes interfere with our volunteer work with Latinos Matter, but we're very happy to be back at the studios of the Internet Dialogue Radio Network with our good friend and producer, Abel Rodriguez. So welcome back to everyone who has listened to the Latinos Matter podcast in the past. Emily, we have lots to talk about today.
We do. I think we should start with a congratulations to President Joe Biden for finally making Congress. And I say that because I think it was the interview following the Virginia elections where he got very serious on the cameras and kind of said that the reason that the Democrats didn't win the governorship in Virginia was because the Democrats seemed to be in such disarray, and that he couldn't blame the voters in Virginia for being a little disappointed.
Sure.
Do you agree with that?
Sure. You know, up to this point, President Biden has been very easy for the Republicans and other opponents to ridicule, to deride. The Afghanistan withdrawal was not handled very well, and things, as you say, have not been going well with the Democrats being so divided. But in the end, the vote in the Senate was 69-30, with 12 or is it 13 Republicans joining the Democrats, and only 6 Democrats refusing to go along with it.
Yes, you're talking about the House, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to have to edit that. I'm sorry.
Okay, repeat that part.
Let me go back to what point should I go back to?
I would go back to the official vote in the House was with only 6 Democrats voting against it.
Yeah. I think many people were surprised that after all of the discussion and disagreement among Democrats, only 6 Democrats, of course, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and 5 others, voted against it, and 13 Republicans joined with the Democrats to pass it. There had been no discussion about any Republicans or what Republicans were going to join with the Democrats. Everyone kind of assumed that everyone all the Republicans would vote against it.
Yes, and we should note that the reason all of these, what they labeled as our progressive Democrats, voted against the bill is because they very much want both of the bills to have been voted on. And as we all know, there's a lot of discussion amongst the progressives and the liberals and the Democratic Party as to whether or not the country could swallow more spending as related to more social issues. And they've been divided and debating things like giving family paid leave, 3 months worth of it, and Medicare, the prescriptions expansion, negotiating the price of Medicare prescription costs. And so it's one of those things where we always seem to have money for war, but we never have money for people. And so this is the debate that's going on. And President Biden, I think, tends to side a little bit more with the moderates than he does the progressives. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the second bill passes that has more of the social spending on it.
Now, with regard to the Virginia election, as you say, the Democrats appear to be in disarray, and the electorate, especially in today's world, can be very fickle. I think you will agree. And it's interesting that even in the news media and among commentators, it seems like just yesterday, in fact, it was just yesterday, that Biden was being seen as inept. And now people are talking about how he's going to go down as one of the greatest presidents ever because this $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is no small thing. We're talking about roads and bridges that are going to last for a lifetime, and people are going to remember these were built during the Biden administration, just like they remember all of the landmarks that occurred during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt.
Yes, and it wasn't just the money for the infrastructure. And as you saw, for people who criticize Biden, Trump called it Infrastructure Week every single week since he was elected and never got to
Right.
pass infrastructure, even though, as everyone knows, he had the House and the Senate when he first started his presidency. So this is a big deal. They hadn't had infrastructure in I don't know how many decades, but literally decades. But it wasn't just the success of the passage of this legislation, but unfortunately, the jobs numbers weren't reported until after the Virginia election as well. And so that was another thing that all of a sudden has boosted Biden's approval rating already by 4 points just in the last day. I want to talk a little bit more about, you were talking about what the pundits were saying. I don't know if you saw the interview where I want to say it was MSNBC. It might have been CNN, where Julian Castro actually said, because I believe the election was only off by 72,000 votes, and he said that there was no outreach to minority communities, and not only that, or limited outreach to minority communities in Virginia, but not only that, Julian Castro also said that the Democratic Party had to stop running kind of your vanilla, candidates, and that they needed to have younger and more diverse candidates that the electorate could get excited about.
Right.
And there was silence from the other commentators when he said that, and then some of the others actually said, no, that's not it. We need to keep appealing to our white women, and so that was interesting. Do you agree with Julian, or do you think that they should try to get the white women back in the tent?
Right. We mentioned the Virginia election briefly, and some interesting news came out about the Virginia election, and the winner, Youngkin, and his son. The latest news is that his 17-year-old son tried to vote illegally twice in that election.
Mm-hmm.
A
Yeah.
little bit shocking.
Not shocking, really. Well, not to me in Montes, and let me tell you why. If you see most of the few illegal ballots that were cast that the Republicans are using as an excuse to pass all these voting blockage bills, most of them were people attempting to vote for Trump. It really was not a majority Democrats who were doing it, and so it really wasn't shocking to me. I think the shocking part was that it was the actual son of the governor, who, like you said, underage, and not only once but twice. So does he get to serve time, or how does that work? I want to know if those restrictions that and those laws that were just passed by the GOP in the states for illegally voting will apply to the governor's son.
And some of the most restrictive voting laws are happening right here in our state of Texas, where both you and I are broadcasting from or podcasting from. rather. And not only that, but right now we're dealing with the very restrictive abortion law that is being passed, the most restrictive in the nation.
And that's a really scary one for me because my first son, I was basically losing him. I was having a miscarriage, and he wasn't expected to live because I wasn't even 7 months pregnant yet. And under this abortion fiasco law, the doctors would have had let me die basically because they couldn't have opened me up and taken him out, which they did. He was larger than he was expected, so lucky for me, he lived. But I have and actually have a family member who does that for a living. She delivers babies. She's a head nurse who delivers babies, and she was telling me that they're having women as before they if the woman was about to die, they would remove the baby and see if the baby was could still live. Now they're letting the woman suffer and give birth rather than do an emergency c-section because the doctors are afraid that they're going to get sued or accused of helping with an abortion. So Texas has one of the highest death rates for women who are pregnant. I think that's about to get even higher, and a lot of people are going. Unfortunately, a lot of women are going to do a lot of suffering. There's going to be a lot of repercussions before we wake up. But in the interim, I feel so bad for these women because I know what it's like to almost die in pregnancy. And it makes me sad that this is happening.
Now, we are the Latinos Matter podcast, and therefore the abortion issue is somewhat different for Latinos than it is maybe for the general population. We're more heavily Catholic. On the other hand, in today's world, I think the younger generations are probably have similar attitudes to abortion as the more general population.
Yes, I wanna say that they do, and one thing is that it's a lie that women just wake up one day and want to get an abortion. It's a very tough decision for women as it is, and to make it a deadly reason, and to make it a deadly reason for women who aren't even having an abortion, they're miscarrying a baby is what's sad for me because I cannot tell you until you've been in those shoes where you're about to die and the doctor has to help you but won't help you because he's afraid of getting sued. We're about to start seeing those stories, folks, and it's not going to be pretty, and it's not right because we just have a man who's trying to get, and I'm talking about Abbott, who's trying to make sure that he's the nuttiest of all the GOP candidates in order to win his primary. um, it's just a sad day that Texas is there right now. And speaking of primaries, can we talk about what are your thoughts that it appears they did the last survey shows Beto O'Rourke from El Paso to be within 1 point of Abbott. Do you believe those polls? Do you think he has a shot?
Before we leave the abortion issue, I wanted to mention one side effect of the whole scenario, and that is that as we are on the border here in Texas, we're aware of lots of women that are going across the border for the so-called abortion pills, and so which are much more readily available, of course, in Mexico without a prescription, and so that's becoming another issue, another abortion-related issue. Now, with regard to Beto O'Rourke and Greg Abbott, the general, I think, opinion is that Beto O'Rourke is some kind of a joke and has no chance.
Is that what is thought of over there? Because over here he's very very liked. I told you how in my very conservative, ultra conservative neighborhood, already the Beto O'Rourke signs are going up again, just like they did when he ran the last time. And this was before Abbott did all the craziness that he did. So I find it interesting how is it possible he's less liked in El Paso than he is over here on the
Run
Dallas?
that by me again. Did you say Beto O'Rourke signs going up in Dallas?
already in my neighborhood, and I live in what is the most conservative neighborhood in all of the US. That's where I live in Dallas. And the Beto O'Rourke signs, after that, that story, it was a very highly covered story here in Dallas when the poll came out. All of the Beto O'Rourke signs came back out in my neighborhood, which is hilarious to me because Beto hasn't even announced. I think the poll was just done as a media idea,
Uh-huh.
and it was very surprising that he was within 1 point of Abbott. And it wasn't just a poll from any Tom, Dick, and Harry. It was actually the American Statesman or the Texas Tribune. It was one of the larger media outlets that did the poll. And like I tell you, got high coverage over here, and the signs are out. So I'm surprised that you say that.
Sure.
Yes. And so, I'm just glad that somebody will run against Abbott because he has done so many horrendous things. We are very scared here in Dallas that everything will freeze again. We lost a good 30% of our trees and 50% of our shrubs. We had no electricity, internet, water, gas for about a week. Most of the people on this side, El Paso was saved from that storm because you get your electricity from Arizona, I believe. Is that correct? But here on this side of Texas, it was the most shocking um, thing that could have ever happened to us because we're used to not having electricity when there's a tornado for a couple of hours or whatever, but 5 days of freezing and with winter coming again, it's going to be interesting whether Abbott can keep us warm and not frozen, the way he did the last time. So he better be praying for good weather, because I don't see how that would help him again if that happened again.
To learn more about Beto O'Rourke against Greg Abbott, go to Latinos Matter. We just retweeted a story. Abbott, Beto in dead heat for Texas governor, new poll shows. Pretty surprising, pretty amazing.
Yes. Hey, and getting back to the infrastructure bill, um, do you think it's bad for Ocasio Cortez that she voted against it?
Well, I don't think anyone has any particular expectations of Ocasio Cortez. She's expected to be a dissident.
So you don't think a candidate could say that she didn't care about her area's roads and bridges and all of that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think she's expected to be one of the ones that's going to hold out.
And do you think it's bad for Democrats if they don't pass the second part of the bill, the second bill?
Well, it will be for Democrats, but not fatally, because especially after this infrastructure bill has passed, they promised the progressives that they are going to work with them on passing the human infrastructure bill. So let's see what happens.
Now let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Congress and the Insurrection Committee, and of course Steve Bannon having ignored their subpoena, and now we're waiting on the Justice Department to, I don't know, put him under arrest, but nothing's happened. It's been weeks and weeks. What do you think is going to come out from the investigation? Do you think the public is over it, or do you think there are surprises coming down for us?
Oh yeah, I think that it's very much alive in the public mind, and I think there is a lot of interest in finding out everything that happened and on January 6th, and I think the interest will continue. I don't think it's going to go away.
Did you hear about the whole event with QAnon here in Dallas, with the QAnon Ice awaiting John F. Kennedy Jr. not to be dead and to appear to become Trump's vice president? That was some craziness. Why do you think this QAnon thing is still popular with so many people?
I really don't know, Emily. It's hard to explain, especially since the stories that come out are just so outrageous, so unbelievable. It's like the the front page of not the National Enquirer, one of those tabloids that really used to come out with space aliens, teaching your kids in school or whatever. But yeah, it's amazing what people will believe nowadays. I was reading something about a parent dealing with a son coming home from school. Apparently, he had a teacher that was spreading a lot of these QAnon conspiracy theories, and the kid was actually turning against his mother because he believed what the teacher told him.
But and it's so weird because it's not just the QAnon people. It's like a lot of weird craziness is going on, and I'll give you an example. I equated to what is happening with that football player. Who is it from the Green Bay Packers? Aaron Rodgers
Sure.
having lied or had spoken in a way to make his teammates and everybody think that he had taken the vaccine, but he actually didn't. And it's like since Trump became president, people have taken it upon themselves not only to be nutty and have conspiracy theories, which this guy does, he's afraid of the vaccine, but to lie. Like everybody seems to be okay with being able to just be a big effing liar. It used to be where you couldn't do that. It would affect your
Well,
credibility.
I'm afraid the right wing talk show hosts and the Fox News and now Newsmax and others have made it acceptable to lie as long as it serves your political interest or political purpose, right? In other words, it's not what's true; it's what will serve, what will help you accomplish your objectives. I noticed someone reached somebody, or rather, we on Latinos Matter once again on Twitter, we retweeted a comment from a gentleman named Frederick Joseph, and he says the shut up and dribble crowd has been real quiet about Aaron Rodgers suddenly becoming one of the top scientists and doctors in the world. And I think the reference is true if it's a black basketball player who says, I don't want to get vaccinated. He's attacked and called ignorant. And someone like Aaron Rodgers, there's a lot more tolerance.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's like the world has gone crazy. Um, as you know, in Georgia, they're having the prosecution of the three white men who killed a guy who was running, a black guy who was running, who's
Mr.
25 years
Aubrey.
old. And and not only that, but the case in El Paso where we had the nutty guy drive from Dallas 10 hours to El Paso to kill 26 people and injure another 26, I believe. That case hasn't even come up, and it's been more than 2 years. And so these cases aren't even slam dunks anymore. And that's what I'm telling you, that it just seems like there's so much craziness that used to be so clear cut as to what the right and wrong things were. And now I don't understand why it's not like that anymore, and why most of Americans aren't standing up and just saying, no, this is wrong. I don't get that.
It things really have gotten very difficult. Wanted to mention before I forget that one story that relating to immigration. One other topic that we need to talk about. We have so many. President Biden is saying that he wants the migrant families that were separated under Trump to receive some sort of compensation. Makes sense.
Yeah, and it's funny because one of the Fox News morning hosts has a son who asked him at a press conference if everybody was going to get like $1 million, like a really, really high amount, like $1 million. And Biden said, no, everybody's not going to get $1 million. And so today they asked him, like, oh, you were lying that they weren't going to get compensation. He says, I never said they wouldn't get compensation. I just said it wouldn't be, let's say,
It wouldn't be $1 million each. I mean, come on.
But I was so proud of him, how he followed that up, where these people, we took their children, and he was visibly angry and saying it with such emphasis that just because you weren't born American, you're still human. And we
Sounded
still took
real.
their and
Sounded
lost their rights.
sincere.
Yes, it sounded very real, very sincere. And I guess that's what I'm talking about. How it wasn't until Trump, honestly, that we stopped being truly decent people. You know, a murder was a murder. We were all shocked by 9/11. Um, Mass murders were few and far between, and the ones we had were just, this is not going to happen anymore. And now it's like we're just numb to each other, and it just makes me so sad. And I don't know how we get it back. I don't know what it's going to take for us to just go back to what's right is right and what's wrong, and we admit, um, like as you've seen this whole fake issue about teaching, what is that they're calling it, critical race theory,
Right. Right.
which everybody knows is not happening. And I don't understand why people are being told over and over and over again, this is not happening. This is something that is studied in law school, as part of the curriculum, and it's even an elective. It's not, you don't even have to select it unless maybe you're going to be a civil rights type of attorney or something like that. And so it just irks me to no end that it's been said over and over again that this is just a thing that has been made up by the right side to get everybody all worked up about their children feeling badly when they're taught about slavery. um, White children feeling badly about being taught about slavery. And to me, it's like, when I learned about slavery, I will never forget, because when I was in third grade, I believe the movie Roots came out, and it was so shocking to me that this had happened. When you're like, what, 10-year-old girl, I could not believe this happened. And we all need to just admit that it happened. And I think a lot of the reason why we can't move on from slavery is that we don't apologize as a nation. We're not shocked that it happened. We don't admit that it happened. It's kind of like when you're in a bad marriage and people won't admit to their own thing, and they're always mad at each other instead of just saying, you know what, it happened, I'm sorry, and we can move on. We just have to acknowledge it so that we can move on. And we all have to acknowledge it as collective Americans, that it was a horrible, horrible thing, kind of like the Germans did with the Nazis and Hitler. They admitted that it was a terrible thing, which allowed them to move on. We have not done that in America. And I can't believe that it's been 50 years probably since I was that girl in third grade. And we're still fighting these same fights, and we're still, being ugly to each other about things that were in the past, but we just won't recognize and move on. I mean, what are your thoughts?
You remember when that series Roots came out on television, and many people were acting like they had no idea, they'd never even heard of it. And all it did was it just put it out there and made it explicit for people. It gave them visuals, right? And I think it was very good for the country. And so the fact that, the climate has changed, I wonder what would happen if Roots came out now. Would these critical race theory people be screaming that you're making America look bad by showing the story of what was the character Kunta Kinte, and uh, the how they brought the slaves from Africa, and how they became slaves and what they went through? I think that many people, or at least some parents, have this idea that you have to teach kids this whitewashed version of American history in order to be patriotic. When in fact, I would argue, and then many would argue, that it's more patriotic to understand and to know the true history of your country.
Yeah, I would think so, but I don't know why they're so afraid. And some people who some people have tried to explain to me that many white Americans, and I guess because I'm a white American in the sense that Hispanics, it's not a Hispanic is not a race, it's an ethnic group, right? So technically I'm white, but I'm also Latina. But
We may have to edit that out, Emily.
no, but still, stay with me. I have had
No, what
my,
I'm saying, technically you're white because you look white. But does that mean you and I are from the same background? Does that mean technically I'm white? I don't accept that.
but you are white as a
No, I
race.
am not. I am not because race is not a legitimate concept.
Oh, see, I like
Okay,
this
the whole
debate.
idea of Caucasian, Negroid, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and all that, those are outdated concepts that have no basis in science and are no longer considered legitimate, particularly in the case of people such as Latinos, most of whom are mestizos or some combination of indigenous and European or other. And so how do you take someone you don't call people who are indigenous white? So how is someone who is born out of people that are both white or white on the one side and indigenous on the other? How does that person end up being classified white? Not legitimately. The reason that happens is because we're using what were basically racist categories and concepts, not scientific.
See, I like that. I like that explanation from you. But I guess my larger point is that if you saw from the last census, 95% of the growth in Texas in the last 10 years, 95% of it was what is categorized as people of color, and mostly Hispanics, mostly Latinos. And so there really is a fear that, and right now we're within less than a percentage point of Hispanics being the majority in Texas. And some people would even argue that Latinos are the majority in Texas. It's just that a lot of people didn't participate in the census because, as you know, it was under Trump and they were afraid of repercussions from it. And that there really is a fear of not being the dominant race in the United States anymore, or group, the dominant group. And so they want to remain strong. And part of remaining strong is not conceding to the facts of what is going on, basically, with the change in demographics. I mean, if we, like in El Paso, right? Because we pretty much lived this in El Paso. When I was a young girl, I want to say Latinos weren't the majority in El Paso, if I can recall correctly. And somehow it's flipped, and it's flipped a lot. I think, what, 85% of El Pasoans are Hispanic, Montes, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, so I've seen that gradual change, and because I'm Latina, I didn't see it as something tragic. But for it to happen throughout Texas, which traditionally has been considered kind of cowboy country, I can see where some people are frightened by that.
Sure.
So what do we do? What do we do to make this a transition where everybody's not, attacking each other, and I don't know, and we can get along?
It's a very difficult and complex problem and something that's very much of our time, right? And it goes back to what we were discussing earlier, and that is all of the misinformation, right? All the misinformation and intentional disinformation. People are having to deal with a lot of things, and they don't always know what to believe, and so therefore they're subject to a lot of influences that at one time were very much diminishing, right? During the civil rights era and afterward, we thought, well, things are starting to change. There's less prejudice. And now we see a resurgence of racism and prejudice and all kinds of unfortunate things that are going on.
But why do you think that that's going on? Why? What do you think spurred it? Is it change? Is it the change in demographics? Some people have said it's when Obama became president.
Well, certainly, President Trump certainly set the tone. It certainly set the tone. I mean, I mean, one of the characteristics of the Trump administration has been the increase in racial division.
So now that we don't have Trump anymore, does it seem to you like there's less of that sentiment, or does it seem like it's still there as or growing, or what is your sense
I'm very
or
hopeful
yours?
that that's going to diminish, and that the other side is going to increase. Just like I'm looking at these statistics on job creation. In the first in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, there were 4.5 million jobs created. In the first 10 months of the Biden administration, 5.8 million jobs.
And
So
so you're saying that as the economy gets better and people feel less uncertain about the future, that we'll go back to where we were.
I'm certainly hopeful. It certainly cannot help. When we're struggling, when the country is struggling, when we're going through difficult economic times. I mean, what better time for people to turn on each other?
Mm, well, I just hope you're right.
I can't let our podcast go by without mentioning the tragedy in Houston, and I want to take the opportunity to send condolences and sympathies to, especially since having occurred right here in the state of Texas, right here in Houston. I just learned when we were doing the podcast that my our producer Abel Rodriguez's son was in Houston. He's also involved in media, and he was involved in some of the video production, and fortunately he is safe. But there were 8 tragic deaths at that concert at Astro World, and one can only imagine, what happened, and whether it could have been prevented.
Okay, yes, I feel the same. It's a tragedy, and oh gosh, I don't know if there's more tragedies or we just hear about all the tragedies sooner. But I'm in for a little bit of good news anywhere I can get it. And then I'm looking through the Twitter feed, and I'm seeing about the shipping blues. Order now, buy your presents. Do you believe that, or do you think that's also just a media hype to get people to go out and buy more?
I wonder. I don't know.
Every time I want to think that, I gotta tell you about my dishwasher story. My dishwasher went out, and we need a dishwasher, and I've been told that I'll probably get one at the end of 2022.
Ha ha ha. Something that I think we need to talk about, again, happening right here in Texas, and it has to do with the actions that the governor is taking with regard to immigration. You know that one of the main propaganda items right now of the Republicans, in particular Governor Abbott in Texas, is that the Biden administration is not taking care of the border, is not enforcing the border. Of course, it's an exaggeration, but he's having state authorities basically supersede the Border Patrol and the federal authorities in arresting migrants. Well, we have a story that we retweeted on Latinos Matter from the Texas Tribune. In the latest blunder, charges dropped against migrants arrested in Texas governor's border crackdown because of faulty paperwork. To quote, the migrants were arrested for trespassing, but court documents failed to specify what property they allegedly trespassed upon. It's the latest misstep in implementation of Greg Abbott's border initiative, which has seen frequent violations of state law and disregard for due process rights. That last statement is exactly what's going on. Disregard for due process rights. The fact that somebody is not a citizen of this country does not mean that they don't have human rights, that they don't have a right to due process. They're using state authorities. Hey, you're trespassing, just generally trespassing. Well, trespassing is a specific crime. It occurs in a specific way and specific property. And you can't just throw out a net and say, "Oh, you're trespassing. We're arresting you." Go to Latinos Matter on Twitter to see the full story.
And kind of related to that, I really think that a lot of the food shortages we're having is because the immigration laws have gotten way too strict and the enforcement has gotten way too strict. And I'm from an era where before we had the wall, um, immigrants would come and they would help us by working the fields, and then they would gladly go home when they weren't working on the fields. And then they would come back when something else that they worked with, and they would work the fields, and then they would gladly go back home. Um,
Well, but the problem is, Emily, that has been a system, but it's been an informal system, right? It's never been. The only time I think that I can think of that it was actually formalized was in the there's been other there's worker visas and the like, but the Bracero program, right? Where
yes.
it was a large specific program. Um, and so we've always relied upon illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, but never formalized their status. We just exploited them.
You're right in the fact that they were exploited because we didn't pay them a fair wage, and of course the working conditions were horrible. I'm not saying that, but now we made it even worse because, as you know, now we can't get the work from them, and they like the option of having more work to do. Um, so we need some kind of a system that accommodates both of us, where they get better working conditions. We get the help that we need because it's true. Americans do not want to do this very, very difficult work, but let's pay them a decent wage. Let's not have them risk their life and pay money to have people cross them over, which makes it way more difficult for them. There's got to be a better solution than the ones we've had in the past.
Absolutely. Emily, we're going to be, we're not running out of time quite yet, but what other topics do we need to cover? We've covered a lot of ground today. Um, I mentioned already the jobs report. There's what other, we mentioned the immigration issue. Um, what do you think is going to happen when going forward, especially now that the infrastructure bill has passed, with regard to the Republicans and how they've been completely hostile to the Biden agenda? I mean, they're are they going to continue with the attacks upon voting rights and as opposed to focusing on what Biden's supposed failures are?
And this is something that a lot of people in my circles, including my husband, always argue, where the Democrats, and I know we had the whole Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high, and all of that, but I really do think that Democrats have to get better at calling out the Republicans. Whenever they have a ribbon cutting for a bridge that they voted against, call them out on it. Whenever they announce their candidacy to run for Congress or the state house or whatever, tell them why. Tell the people, scream it at the top of your lungs that you're running against a Republican because they voted against your roads. If you're running for a school board, tell them that it's nuts, to think that that critical race theory is being taught, that's ridiculous. And just call out the other candidates, because we try to always take the high road, and as you know, people don't necessarily listen to the high road. They want to be energized, and we need to sell our case. We need to sell that we want to lower the cost of prescription drugs for the elderly. We want to scream at the top of our lungs that the elderly need help with their hearing aids, and that more student loans need to be forgiven, or at least give students a better interest rate. Montes, when I went to college, my interest rate on my student loan was literally 1%. Right now, the interest rate is very, very low, and students are still paying 8 to 11% on their student loans. That is ridiculous. And so we just need to get better at articulating our arguments and getting people excited about coming out to vote for us. And instead of always seeming so mamby-pamby and apologizing for the policies that we want to pursue, right? And Republicans don't. Republicans just say no and laugh and point at us, and we let them. And so I guess that's where I see whether or not we do well in the midterms. And a
To
lot of
con-
that is
Go
because
ahead.
of the Democrats. Half of the Democrats want to get candidates who are kind of not controversial and middle of the road, because we don't want to offend the possible Republicans who would vote for us, and the others say BS, they're never going to vote for us. We need to get strong candidates that are exciting and will get our base out, because there are more of us. There are more people who think like we do. um, what do you think? Do you agree
Well,
that?
to follow with your thought, I would refer everyone to our Latinos Matter Twitter, a comment by a gentleman named Michael Jolet. So far, Democrats have cut child poverty in half, added 5.3 million jobs, managed the most ambitious vaccine rollout in the nation's history, and passed a $1.2 trillion investment in water, roads, bridges, and broadband internet. Trump gave 2 trillion to the rich and retweeted a lot. Also from Latinos Matter Twitter, the Daily Edge, 531,000 jobs created in October, 5 million jobs created in 9 months, unemployment at 4.6%, and the 1.2 billion infrastructure bill passed on a bipartisan basis. That's a lot to talk about.
Well, let's not forget about the stock market. The stock market is at its highest level ever. So remember when Trump said that the stock market was going to die and crash and everybody was going to lose all their money if he didn't win the election? So that one as well is at what is it, 61? There was 61,000 trades yesterday. Or no, I'm sorry. There were 61,000 trades made between 2004 and 2010, and apparently that's a 20% it outperformed the norm by 20%. So everything seems to be positive except the Democrats. And it's one of those things where I blame James Carville a lot, who was I don't know if people know this, but he was one of the strategists when Bill Clinton was president. And Bill Clinton was a fabulous president. I got to tell you, because I lived through the 90s, times were really, really good. That's the reason why he got away with Monica Lewinsky, because he really was a good president and everybody made money and we had a good time in the 90s. However, James Carville, that was a different time, and people are still going to him as the go-to guy on what we should do as Democrats. And I tend to believe that we need to live in today's times, and we need to get candidates who excite more our kids, so that our party can continue to grow and we can move in a progressive direction. Um,
Absolutely.
you agree with that too, Montes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do need to, develop this positive attitude, this whole positive notion of what the Democrats are doing. Like someone mentioned, I forget who was, someone online or on TV said, the Democrats are fighting about how to do things so good for people, how much good to do.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? I mean, that's not a bad position to be in. I would go way back to the problem. I think, and you have to have a sense of humor about it. Going way back to Will Rodgers, who said, "I'm not a member of an organized party. I'm a Democrat."
I know, but it's just so infuriating that the solution for a lot of Democrats when they don't get what they want isn't let's give our president more Democrats so that they can get what they want. We did that with Obama. Obama only had the House and the Senate for like a minute. And then we kind of did that to Clinton too. That's when Newt Gingrich came into power. And we as Democrats don't learn that it's difficult to get what we want when we when we show up and elect a president and then don't show up in the midterms and give them the Congress that will let them pursue the agenda that we have, the policy that we want. And there's already the flags going up that it's going to happen again in the midterms, and there's got to be enough of us that say no, it doesn't have to be like that. Let's not do that again and then not get what we want. Not voting because we didn't get what we want within a year and a half is not the solution. If anything, we got to give them, like with FDR, we have to give them more and more Democrats so that we can get the agenda that we want.
Once again, agreed, Emily.
And so that was all that I had on my long list of things to discuss, except one other one. I want to get your feelings about Vice President Kamala Harris.
Sure.
It seems almost, and I don't know if this is on purpose, but she's not out there as much as I thought she would be. She stands behind President Biden a lot, and I'm the first to acknowledge that with the exception of Cheney, who thought he was president when Bush was president, the vice president really isn't that visible. But
I think a lot is expected of her because of who she is and where she comes from and everything. But I think as a strategy, you would not, especially when President Biden, because he's older and like that, has been so subject to criticism that, the ridicule that he's not all there and this and that, which of course is unfair, and ageism, discrimination against older people. But I think on the one hand, you also don't want her to overshadow him, right? In other words, he can't handle a job, so he's got this young woman doing the job for him. You know what I'm saying? Like you say, in the past, the vice president oftentimes has not been very visible or important at all. But again, just because of who she is, I think people expect a lot of her and they expect her to be more visible. You may have seen a story, I didn't pay very much attention to it, but there was a story about where was she during the January 6th insurrection.
Wow.
You figure she was in a secure place. I mean, she's the vice president, just in case anything happens, or whatever. But there was some talk about there was a mystery about where she had been.
But you know what? She technically wasn't vice president yet. So she would have been with the Senate. Had she already? I don't think she had resigned yet. So she would have been with the senators, wouldn't she?
Well,
I'm sure
that's apparently that's still to be determined.
Yeah, but that's another thing is that, and it's funny you should mention that because then I was thinking about Pence, how I wanted to mention that story that's been verified that he was taking advice from Dan Quayle,
Right.
Bush one's vice president, as to how he could get away with insurrection, and Quayle, who we all thought at the time was an empty head, actually gave him the right answer, right? Which is certify the damn election. So Quayle has been vindicated for history. Prior to that, I'm sure he would have passed on as a joke, but he actually did a very commendable thing. So we should applaud him for that.
Emily, as we said before, we have we had a lot of ground to cover, and we have covered a lot of ground. We're almost out of time, so let's make any final comments that we would like to make. I want to remind everyone once again, go to Latinos Matter on Twitter. This is how Latinos Matter began. Emily and I have known each other for many years, and we've always been interested in politics and always been involved. And so we came up with this idea that we needed to create something where we could communicate information and ideas that were relevant to the Latino community and to the general community as well. So we created Latinos Matter on Twitter. So go there and you can see all of the different tweets and retweets. And Emily, what else do we need to say?
I think we need to talk a little bit about COVID. I saw news reports this weekend that by January, COVID will be mostly a done thing. And in the past, Do you agree with that, or do you think it's gonna? Well, everybody kind of agrees that it's gonna be like the flu and it's with us forever, but not as something that has us locked down. Do you believe that?
You know, I hate to speculate. There are so many people, especially on the radio. I hear these talk shows say, "I'm not a doctor, but," and then they give out all kinds of information that it's questionable whether you need to be a doctor or not.
How is El Paso doing? Is it still doing better than most places?
I believe we are. We were good from the beginning, and that's the beautiful thing about El Paso. People are very open minded, and I think that people are getting vaccinated.
Yes, and I think another thing, because people have asked me here in Dallas how El Paso did it, because at first El Paso got hit the hardest. But the thing about El Paso is that although it's a big city with like almost 1 million people, everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. So if as people were dying, it was your mother or your mother's friend or your cousin Tito, or so right away you knew that this was a serious thing. Where here in Dallas, not so much. You really hear about somebody who's sick, but it's just such a big city. I think like 5, 7 million people, some ridiculous amount like that. So I think it was easier to pretend it wasn't happening than it would be in a place like El Paso.
Well, I can tell you that in my family, one of my very closest family members was, in fact, very ill from COVID. We were concerned about whether he would make it, but he recovered. He's back at work, and we're just very thankful. Emily, I'm going to end the podcast by thanking everyone for joining us on the Latinos Matter podcast. As we mentioned before, we're going to be trying to do these every week as we were doing in the past. Want to invite once again everyone to go to the Latinos Matter Twitter, and especially I want to thank our producer Abel Rodriguez and his Dialogue Internet Radio Network for hosting the Latinos Matter podcast. Go ahead, Emily.
Yes, I too would like to thank Abel, who is notably one of the best in the business and has been in it a long time. So I'd like to thank him for helping us with this. And thank you, Montes, as always, for loving politics and policy as much as I do. It's very rare to find someone who even wants to discuss it. And I keep telling everybody how important it is to understand the issues, to stay informed, so that when you hear crazy things, you can say, no, that doesn't sound right. And you can go check it out for yourself. And do that. Please do that. Don't just take it from your uncle, tios, friends, cousins, QAnon Twitter feed.
If you'd like to send us a message, do so on Latinos Matter on Twitter. Just send a message and let us know what you think about the program. Maybe we said something incorrect you'd like us to correct. We'll be happy to do so. And that's it for this podcast. Once again, thank you to everyone, and we'll see you next time. Hasta luego.
Remember that you can follow Latinos Matter on Twitter at Latinos Matter and on Facebook at facebook.com/Latinos-Matter. Thank you for listening.